Welcome back to Turning Hard Times into Good Times. I am your host, Jay Taylor, and I'm really pleased to have with me once again Ellen Brown. She's been here a number of times in the past, so I'm not going to read over her bio right now. It is posted, of course, at the Voice America Business channel, my site at that channel, so go there if you'd like to learn more, or more simply just Google Ellen Brown, and you'll find enormous amounts of information about her. She is a prolific writer. She's had some very, very big books, some bestsellers. The Web of Debt is the one that I think of most often with respect to Ellen, because it is so important. But she's done work in other areas of life too, always looking for what is right and what is just. And I think that's what I think of Ellen, as somebody who's trying to do the right thing and to help other people recognize when people are not doing the right thing, and in a very constructive manner. So thanks for joining me again, Ellen. It's really good to have you with me.
Thanks. It's always great to talk to you.
Always good to have you with me. I just had to get you on the show when I read your article, The War on Savings, the Panama Papers, Bail-ins, and the Push to Go Cashless. We've had you on recently to talk about bail-ins for sure. The banking system, which we are led to believe by the policymakers, when I watch Bloomberg or CNBC or some of these big networks, that the banks have never been stronger. There's no reason why they would ever need any bail-ins, because they have built in this tremendous amount of capital underneath on their balance sheets, and so no need to worry. But what say you about that?
Well, that's certainly not true in Europe. At Davos in January, where all the big money players meet to discuss the hot issues of the day, according to Ambrose Evans Pritchard, writing in January from Davos, there was a report from William White, who was the former chief economist of the Bank for International Settlements, who said that the situation is actually worse than it was in 2007. The central bankers' policies have all sort of run aground. I mean, they've run out of tools. They've run out of bullets, as they say. Mm-hmm. So they typically central banks lower interest rates in order to stimulate the economy, but they've gotten the interest rate all the way down to zero for banks. I mean, for the central bank, the lending to the banks. Of course, we're not at zero. We, the homeowners and so forth, aren't at zero.
Sure.
And that hasn't worked. So now they're talking about negative interest, which, I mean, you have to think, if going to zero didn't work, what good is going to negative interest going to be? The theory is that if people have to actually pay money to keep their money in the bank, to have to pay interest to keep their money in the bank, that they will then go out and spend it. But they won't. I mean, they're only going to spend it if they have extra money to spend. This worked back in an experiment in the 1930s in Wurgel in Austria, I guess, but what they did was they issued money first, and then they put a stamp tax on it so that the money decayed over time. It lost value over time. And so people did rush out and spend it. But this was money that they didn't have before. This was money, it was like you give people, I think you could do this today, give people an extra $1,000 a month on a debit card there's a lot of talk lately about giving that sort of bonus to everybody as a way to stimulate the economy. It's like quantitative easing for the people, basically, instead of for the banks. Instead of putting the money in the banks, you put it directly into the pockets of the people who are going to spend it. And these are not the rich people, these are the poor people. They are the people that will rush out and spend on goods and services, which is where the economy needs to be stimulated. We don't need more investments in derivatives and other, financial products that aren't actually making things. We need investment in products, which will put people back to work and so forth. But anyway, so that's the theory of negative interest, but you have to wonder if that's really what they're up to. They seem to be up to something else. And according to that same report from William White, they'll be going to bail-ins. They have now, as of 2016, started a new official bail-in program in Europe where they will be bailing in the depositors along with everybody else. Along with the other creditors. So, of course, this is theoretically the depositors over the insurance limit, which in Europe is 100,000 euros, but they've been dropping the insurance limit. They dropped it in England or the UK from 85,000 to 75,000 pounds, and you can just envision at some point they're going to drop it more and more, and then they'll say, sorry, there's no insurance, and all your money is subject to a bail-in, which means that the banks are not just allowed but actually mandated to recapitalize themselves by turning the deposits of their customers into capital for the bank. So instead of having your money that you can withdraw at any time like you thought you had, suddenly you will have stock in a bankrupt bank, which is not going to do much good to pay your bills. So that is one concern. And then what I was actually writing about, or what prompted my article, was this whole Panama Papers, where 11.5 million documents have been revealed in what was considered to be a WikiLeaks sort of revelation, but it clearly wasn't a WikiLeaks, because we don't get to see the 11.5 million documents. All we got to see were a few limited documents. The release was to various major media, and they therefore controlled which ones they let out, and what they let out were, of course, our big economic rivals or military enemies, which would be, or I guess we call them economic competitors, but they could be military enemies, which is Russia and China and Syria.
Iran,
yeah. And Iceland, interestingly, the president of Iceland they went after. Well, Iceland is the only country that refused to bail out their banks, that actually threw some bankers in jail instead. So it's clearly the enemies. They were out to get certain big players. They were not exposing all the big money that's hidden in offshore tax havens, which was what it was alleged to be.
Well,
and it seemed to me. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that Iceland is hardly an economic threat to the United States. I mean, you could make the case perhaps Russia and China for sure, but Iceland, so I wonder if it wasn't just meant to be a message to any other country that might want to try to protect their own sovereignty and their own sovereign interest to don't you dare do that or we're going to get you.
Exactly. Yeah, It was like they're shooting at the model or at the boldness of Iceland in trying to break away. Yeah.
Yeah, incredible. All right, so the Panama Papers, very selective, as you're saying, very selective. You started out your missive, April 10th missive that you wrote, exposing tax dodgers is a worthy endeavor, but the limited hangout of the Panama Papers may have less noble ends, dovetailing the war on cash and the imminent threat of massive bail-ins. Connect the dots for us, Ellen, if you could. Help us understand how the two are related.
Well, it was suggested, and it seems to me likely, that there is this push to find where the bodies are, to find where all the money is. Because if what they're actually trying to do is bail in all the money, all the deposits, they want to know where they are. They don't want people to have the ability to hide their money in offshore tax havens. And of course, that they themselves, the big bankers, have other offshore tax havens that haven't been exposed and probably won't be. They have other ways of hiding their money. But it appears that who they're after would be the 1%, like the 0.001% are now going after the 1%. They've already exhausted the 99% who are already so heavily in debt that they can't really go further. I mean, they don't want to borrow more, or if they do want to borrow, the banks won't lend to them. So now it's this great parasite that is eating every form of capital everywhere in the world, and they pretty much exhausted the little people. So now they're going after the big people who aren't quite as big as they are. All
right, so. You just to put this in perspective, Ellen, the 1%, we're talking about we're talking at least about millionaires here, aren't we? I mean, $1 million isn't all what it used to be. So we're talking about some pretty wealthy people that would be now the target of the predators. It's almost like a science fiction movie in which something is created in the lab and starts to gobble up everything in sight and just overwhelm everything. It seems to be that kind of a situation that we have here.
Yeah, but looking on the bright side, it seems to me that they may have overreached once again, or they may get unintended consequences. People were so outraged at the idea that there is all this money offshore. It's actually legal. It's not like it's illegal money. It's just that they're not paying their taxes. They're not paying their fair due. And so now there's even more of a populist movement to expose what's going on and to reform the banking system and so forth. So maybe it'll have a good effect in the end.
Well, you would think, Ellen, that, if 1%, I'm thinking you were talking about the media that is apparently sort of sifting through and, exposing those wrongdoers or tax cheats or people that aren't paying their taxes now. I mean, it used to be you put your money offshore, and when you brought it back on for your own use, you would be taxed then. As you say, not necessarily anything that's illegal, but it's sort of an idea that if these really rich people aren't paying their taxes, then it makes people angry. It doesn't seem just, for sure. But you would think that two problems I have with the argument that that the media, I mean, I'm playing devil's advocate here a little bit, but that the media would not be interested in leaking out some of this information, even if it is people, people in America. For example, no Americans, I guess, that have been exposed, and there's some 400 or so whose names supposedly were on the list, but the media hasn't really talked about them. But you'd think that certainly some of those media people, the big name people that we see, would be among that 1% list, right? And you would think that if they thought they were going to be eaten alive by this parasitic banking institution, that they would start to get a little ticked off too, even those people at the top.
Yeah, well, there's certainly there was a lot of outrage among sort of our people, the money reformers. That they want total transparency. In other words, that we can't. There's no longer a way to have privacy about your money. So that's another push that we're seeing, which is the push to go cashless. If they know where all the money is and it's all in an account somewhere, then they can confiscate it. So there's no way to accumulate. You work hard, you try to save your money, and then it disappears. Yeah.
Yeah, and so I guess the argument goes. I mean, this is the way it's presented to us, the people. The banks are in trouble, but it's for our best interest, of course, the best interest of all the American people, that the system remain intact, and therefore it's good if we have some of the money taken from us to make sure that the system stays in place. I mean, the same argument that was used in 2008, 2009, while the banks should get bailed out, is because it's for the good of all of us, right? That's the argument that they give us.
Right, and it seems to me we're at the point where we have to change the system, and people are realizing that. And there's a way to change the system, and that's what I write about all the time, that this whole notion that money should be created by banks and that we should have to borrow their money and pay them interest on it it's not the only way to run the system, and it's clearly not fair. Why should private people be creating our money and lending it to us? 97% of the money supply is created by banks when they make loans, as the Bank of England just recently acknowledged. I mean, money reformers have said that for a century, but the Bank of England officially came out and said it. So once you have the official people saying it, then it's true.
Yeah, it's a perception is reality in politics, I guess, and so they continue to give this this model. And what's really crazy about it, Ellen, is they create money out of nothing essentially, and then charge us interest on it. I mean, it's just incredible, and it's well, you and I have talked about this.
And it doesn't work. It's non-functional, as we're saying. Yeah. I mean, it results in this parasitic system where you have this just continual feeding on financialization without actually producing things. Mm-hmm. Starving out the people and starving out the planet, or wasting the planet.
Well, we've seen, the Donald Trump on the Republican side, and Bernie Sanders, I think, reflecting the frustration of people without people maybe necessarily thinking through it very much. I'm sure most of the masses haven't thought about it. They just know that something is terribly wrong. Things aren't going well. Things aren't going right. But the notion that we don't produce things, and I'm not sure exactly where Bernie Sanders stands on this, but nor do I know where Trump really stands on it. I think we've just heard a lot of rhetoric, but we're in terms of getting rid of the jobs that create things. You mentioned that we need to be producing things. Well, we've gotten rid of a lot of that production that provided good middle income wages and the middle class for the middle class. Do you see any hope through the political process? Do you see anything positive that might evolve from either side? Are you hopeful at all in that regard?
Well, I do think the Trump and Sanders phenomena are remarkable. It just does show that the people are ready for a change. They're fed up with the establishment and the establishment candidates. We've had the money party, as John McMurtry wrote in an article recently about Trump. It was an article called "Why Does the Establishment Hate Trump?" And it's the money party on both sides have controlled politics ever since the 1890s. The Populist Party of the 1890s was the last challenge to the two-party system, and since then it's been basically, one big banking system against another big banking system. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's big money against big money. So Trump would get in there and blow the whole thing. I mean, he's talking about cutting the military in half, which is unbelievable. Nobody has ever challenged the military to that extent. And talking about making friends with Russia and China so that we can, be productive. The whole idea is, like, let's get along and produce stuff.
Right. What's wrong with that, huh?
Yeah.
Well, just thinking back, Alan, that's going back, I guess, the election of McKinley, when McKinley was backed by the Rockefellers, essentially, and outwent and defeated was, I guess, that was the Williams Jennings Bryan, right? That was the last. That was the last populist movement. So that was a really important election, I would say, huh? In American history. Right, and it was an important movement too. I mean, the people then actually understood the money system, I think, better than they do now. It's been all obscured since with our whole education system is now controlled, and the media are controlled. The media should be our protection. They should be telling us what's going on, but in fact, they're giving us they're manipulating information so that we can't see what's going on. But in the 1890s, the farmers and the factory workers, they knew what was going on, and they had a political movement starting all the way from Lincoln. They had a political movement to go back to the people's money, either government-issued money or silver, which was considered the people's money because it was a lot more accessible. Yeah. Yeah, William Engdahl has written about this, and in fact, it was the moneyed interest from the Bank of England and New York that had all the gold, and so they didn't want silver to be money, even though it was constitutional money in the United States. That would have allowed the common folks a more even footing and a better chance at succeeding in life. But Ellen, one thing that sort of bothers me, I mean, it doesn't bother me so much because I know where I stand on this, but there may be listeners out there that wonder, it just sounds like another conspiracy issue, conspiratorial nonsense. In fact, that the media can control things. I mean, I have friends that would argue that, you've got a lot of different networks. Why wouldn't they want to blow the whistle on somebody in the United States, perhaps some big deal person? Why wouldn't they do that in order to get a leg up on their competition?
Well, it seems to me that you've only got I know I used to be one of these, when I was a busy lawyer and trying to raise kids, I was the type of person that turned on the news for 10 minutes and that was it. That was all I had time for.
Sure.
And it was one of the 3 major stations. I just wasn't aware of everything I got aware of later when we went in the Foreign Service and I had lots of time to study and I wrote books and so forth and really got into these subjects. But I think that's what most people do. So if you can control just those few big stations, those few big outlets where most people get their information, then you can win elections. Or, I ran for state treasurer in California, and I realized of course, it wasn't that I expected to win. I was just trying to get the public bank idea out there. But there are 34 million voters in California, and most of them just go down the line and check Democrat or Republican. They consider themselves a Democrat or a Republican, and as long as those parties can control their channels or their stations or whatever, or their news outlets, and those people will tend to read only, if you're a Democrat in LA, you tend to read the LA Times, and so they don't read the other news outlets, and so it all, until you have reason to suspect, and I think that's the good of the internet and of shows like yours, etc. And nowadays we have a lot more access to information.
Right. Well, and also people have a reason to suspect because they know that their dollars aren't going very far these days, and the shrinking number of dollars they have. Ellen, we're out of time already. It's just it just always goes so fast for you. But I want to tell my listeners we only scratched the surface on this article, not to mention many others that Ellen has. Go to Ellen's website, and what is that, Ellen? Tell us real quickly. I've forgotten the best place to go.
Okay, well, ellenbrown.com.
ellenbrown.com, that should do it.
Is that the same? Yeah.
Yeah, Web of Debt. Go there, folks. Do that. Catch up with Ellen. Very important stuff. Ellen, we want to have you back again sometime soon. Always so much to talk to you about. Always so important what you're talking to us about. So thank you very much.